The woman who stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Breckenridge, Colorado, that sweltering August morning in 1883, had the look of someone who had traveled far and expected nothing but more hardship ahead. Her name was Diana Mitchell, and at 23 years old, she carried herself with a determination that spoke of battles already fought and survived. The hem of her simple brown traveling dress was caked with the dust of 1,000 miles, and the small carpet bag she clutched contained everything she owned in this world. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, squinting against the mountain sun, and wondered if this town would finally be the place where she could start over. Across the street, leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, Zachary Zimmerman watched the stagecoach unload its passengers with mild interest. At 28, he had seen plenty of people come and go from Breckenridge, mostly men chasing dreams of gold or silver that had already played out years ago. The sight of a woman traveling alone was unusual enough to catch his attention, but it was something else that made him pause, the way she held herself, like she was ready to face down whatever came next without flinching. He had been in town picking up supplies for his ranch, a small spread about 5 miles outside town where he raised cattle and horses, mostly alone except for an aging ranch hand who helped during roundup season. Zachary had inherited the ranch from his father 3 years ago, after both his parents succumbed to influenza within a week of each other. Since then, he had thrown himself into the work, rising before dawn and falling into bed exhausted each night, grateful for the fatigue that kept loneliness at bay. He was tall, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. His hands were calloused from honest work, and his face had been weathered by sun and wind into something that women in town occasionally called handsome, though he paid little attention to such talk. Diana took a deep breath and started walking toward the largest building on the main street, which a sign proclaimed to be the Silver Bell Hotel and Restaurant. Her boots, worn thin at the heels, clicked against the wooden planks. She had exactly $12.37 left to her name, and she needed to find work immediately. The hotel seemed like a logical place to start, as such establishments often needed help in the kitchen or with laundry. Inside, the hotel lobby was dim and smelled of tobacco smoke and old wood. A man with mutton chop whiskers stood behind the counter, eyeing her with the kind of assessment she had grown accustomed to in the weeks since leaving Kansas City. She squared her shoulders and approached him directly. "Good morning, sir. My name is Diana Mitchell, and I am looking for employment. Does your establishment have need of a cook, laundress, or chambermaid?" The man stroked his whiskers thoughtfully. "Well now, Miss Mitchell, I might have something. My cook quit last week to get married, and I have been struggling to manage with just the day girl. Can you actually cook, or are you just desperate?" "I can cook," Diana said firmly. "I worked in a restaurant in Kansas City for 2 years, and before that, I managed my family's household." This was technically true, though she left out the part about her family being dead and the restaurant owner who had made increasingly unwelcome advances until she had been forced to leave. But those were details this stranger did not need to know. "All right then. I will give you a trial. Room and board plus $2 a week to start. If you work out, we can discuss raising that after a month. You will cook breakfast and dinner for hotel guests, and we serve some meals to townspeople as well. Start tomorrow morning at 5. Relief washed through Diana so strongly her knees felt weak. "Thank you, sir. I will not disappoint you. Name is Horace Perkins. I own this hotel. There is a small room off the kitchen you can have. It is not much, but it is clean." The room turned out to be barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, with a single window that looked out onto the alley behind the hotel. But it had a door that locked from the inside, and the bed had clean sheets, and that was more than Deanna had dared hope for. She unpacked her few belongings, washed her face and hands in the basin, and went to examine the kitchen where she would be spending most of her waking hours. The kitchen was reasonably well equipped, with a large cast iron stove, sturdy work tables, and shelves stocked with basic provisions. Deanna felt her spirits lift slightly. She could work with this. She had always found comfort in cooking, in the straightforward logic of recipes and the satisfaction of creating something nourishing from raw ingredients. That evening, she wandered the main street of Breckenridge, getting her bearings. The town sat in a valley surrounded by mountains that still held patches of snow on their highest peaks, even in summer. Main Street consisted of perhaps 24 buildings. The hotel, a general store, a bank, a saloon, a blacksmith, a livery stable, a church, and various other establishments. Gold Creek ran along the edge of town, and she could hear its constant murmur even over the sounds of horses and wagons. She noticed the tall cowboy from earlier coming out of the saloon, and their eyes met briefly before she looked away. There had been something in his gaze that was not the usual male assessment she had grown tired of, but rather a quality of recognition, as if he saw something familiar in her circumstances. Zachary had noticed her too, and as he rode back toward his ranch that evening, he found himself thinking about the woman with the determined expression. He wondered what had brought her to Breckenridge alone, but he knew better than most that everyone who came west was running from something or towards something, and often both at once. The next morning, Deanna rose in the dark and lit the kitchen stove, grateful for years of experience that let her work efficiently even in an unfamiliar space. By the time the first hotel guests came down for breakfast, she had prepared coffee, biscuits, gravy, bacon, and eggs. Horace Perkins watched carefully as she served the food, and she saw his expression shift from skepticism to cautious approval as guests complimented the meal. "You are not lying about being able to cook," he said grudgingly. "That is the best breakfast this hotel has served in months." Deanna allowed herself a small smile. "Thank you, sir." The work was hard but not impossible. She cooked 3 meals a day, with breakfast and dinner being the main services. Lunch was simpler, usually just sandwiches and soup for whoever happened to come in. Between meals, she cleaned the kitchen, prepared ingredients for the next service, and caught whatever rest she could. The young woman who helped during the day, a sweet 16-year-old named Lucy, was eager to learn and proved to be good company. A week passed, then 2. Deanna fell into a rhythm, her body adjusting to the long hours and constant activity. She began to learn the regular customers, the miners who still worked claims up in the mountains, the merchants, the ranch hands who came to town on Saturdays. And she noticed that the tall cowboy came in for dinner every Saturday evening, always sitting at the same table near the window, always ordering steak and potatoes, always leaving a fair tip. Zachary had started coming to the hotel for dinner as a break from his own cooking, which consisted mainly of beans, bacon, and whatever else would not require much attention. But he found himself looking forward to Saturdays more than he wanted to admit, and he knew it had less to do with the food, though that was excellent, and more to do with catching glimpses of the woman working in the kitchen. On the 3rd Saturday, he worked up the courage to speak to her beyond just placing his order. When she came to refill his coffee, he said, "That was the best steak I have had in a long time. You are quite a cook." Deanna looked at him properly for the first time, taking in the honest appreciation in his eyes. "Thank you. I am glad you enjoyed it. I am Zachary Zimmerman. I have a ranch west of town." Deanna Mitchell. She hesitated, then added, I arrived about 3 weeks ago. I know. I saw you get off the stage. He felt his ears grow warm, worried that sounded like he had been watching her too closely. I was picking up supplies that day. Oh. Deanna found herself wanting to continue the conversation but aware that she had other tables to attend to. I should get back to work. Of course. Have a good evening, Miss Mitchell. You as well, Mr. Zimmerman. It was a small exchange, but both of them thought about it more than seemed reasonable for such a brief interaction. Zachary rode home that night feeling less lonely than he had in months. Deanna fell asleep that night with a slight smile on her face, remembering kind eyes and a respectful manner. The next Saturday, they spoke a bit more. Zachary asked how she was settling into Breckenridge, and Deanna admitted she had not seen much beyond the main street and the view from her window. The mountains here are beautiful, Zachary said. If you ever get a day off, you should take a walk up toward the pass. The wildflowers are still blooming up there. That sounds lovely, but I do not really have days off, Deanna said. Just a few hours here and there. That is a shame. Everyone needs a break from work sometimes, says the rancher, Deanna said with a trace of humor. I imagine you work sunrise to sunset most days. Guilty as charged, Zachary admitted with a slight grin. But even I take Sunday afternoons off when I can. The Lord commanded rest for a reason. Over the following weeks, their Saturday conversations grew longer and more personal. Deanna learned that Zachary had been raised on the ranch, that he loved the work despite its hardships, that he had a horse named Ranger he had trained from a colt. Zachary learned that Deanna had grown up in Missouri, that her parents had died when she was 18, that she had a brother somewhere in California she had not seen in 3 years. You miss him? Zachary asked one evening. Every day, Deanna said quietly. But he had his own life to build, and I had mine. Sometimes family cannot stay together, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. Zachary nodded, understanding the loneliness in her words because he felt it too. The ranch feels emptier than it should, he found himself admitting. My father always said a ranch needs a family to make it complete, not just one person working themselves into the ground. Deanna met his eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared loneliness and perhaps the first stirring of something more. It was mid-October when Zachary finally gathered his courage to ask the question that had been forming in his mind for weeks. The aspen trees had turned gold in the mountains, and there was frost on the ground most mornings. He came to the hotel on a Thursday evening instead of his usual Saturday, and Deanna was surprised to see him. Mr. Zimmerman, this is unexpected, she said, genuinely pleased to see him despite the break in routine. I was hoping to speak with you if you have a moment when you are done working, he said, his hat in his hands. Deanna's heart beat faster. I should be finished in about an hour. There are not many diners tonight. I will wait. True to his word, Zachary sat at his usual table nursing a cup of coffee until Deanna emerged from the kitchen, having cleaned up from the evening service. She had removed her apron and smoothed her hair, suddenly self-conscious. Shall we walk a bit? Zachary suggested. It is a nice evening. They walked down Main Street in the cool evening air, their breath making small clouds in the lamplight. Zachary seemed to be gathering his thoughts, and Deanna waited, her stomach fluttering with anticipation and nervousness. Miss Mitchell, Deanna, he began, then paused. I am not much good at pretty words. I am just a rancher who spends most of his time with horses and cattle. But these past couple months, getting to know you, talking with you on Saturdays, it has made me realize how lonely I have been. And more than that, it has made me think that maybe I do not have to be lonely anymore. Deanna's breath caught. Mr. Zimmerman. Please call me Zachary. What I am trying to say, and making a mess of it I am sure, is that I would like to court you properly, if you would be amenable to that. I know you have only been in town a short while, and maybe you have other plans, or maybe you do not think of me that way. But I had to ask, because I think you are the finest woman I have ever met, and I would regret it for the rest of my life if I did not at least try. Deanna felt tears prick her eyes, though they were not sad tears. "Zachary," she said softly, "I would be honored to have you court me. The truth is, I look forward to Saturdays more than any other day of the week, and it has everything to do with seeing you." The smile that broke across Zachary's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Really? You mean it?" "I mean it," Deanna confirmed. And then she was smiling too, and they stood there on the wooden sidewalk grinning at each other like fools until a passing miner gave them a curious look. Over the next few months, Breckenridge saw the courtship of Zachary Zimmerman and Deanna Mitchell unfold in the proper, careful way of the time. Zachary came to town twice a week now, on Wednesday evenings and Saturday evenings, to have dinner at the hotel and spend time with Deanna. When she could get a few hours off, they would walk together, sometimes down by Gold Creek, sometimes up toward the edge of town where the pine forests began. They talked about everything and nothing. Deanna told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother's flower garden and her father's quiet strength. She told him about the hard years after they died, working whatever job she could find, always moving when circumstances became untenable. She did not share all the details of the difficulties she had faced, but Zachary understood enough to feel a deep respect for her resilience. Zachary told her about learning to ride before he could barely walk, about his father teaching him to rope cattle and his mother teaching him to read by lamplight. He spoke of the loneliness after they died, of wondering if he was meant to run the ranch alone for the rest of his life. "I started thinking maybe that was just my lot," he admitted one November evening as they walked by the creek. "Maybe some people are meant to be alone. And now," Deanna asked softly, "now I think maybe I was just waiting for the right person to come along." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Deanna, I know we have only been courting a few months, but I am not a young man who plays games or has time to waste. I know what I want, and I want you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every evening. I want to build a life with you on that ranch." Diana's heart was pounding. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" Zachary reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's. My father gave it to me before he died and told me to give it to a woman worthy of it." "You are that woman, Deanna. Will you marry me?" Deanna looked at the ring, then at Zachary's face, open and hopeful and a little scared. She thought about the life he was offering, hard work certainly, but also companionship, partnership, love. She thought about the alternative, continuing to work in the hotel kitchen, always alone, always just surviving rather than truly living. "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes, Zachary, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms, and they shared their first kiss there by the creek, with the sound of water rushing over stones and the smell of pine in the cold air. They married 3 weeks later in Breckenridge's small church, on a Sunday morning in early December. Deanna wore a simple blue dress that Lucy had helped her sew, and she carried a small bouquet of evergreen sprigs tied with ribbon. Zachary wore his best suit, which he had not worn since his father's funeral, and he could not stop smiling. Half the town showed up, curious about the union and generally approving of the match. Horace Perkins grumbled about losing his cook, but gave Deanna a wedding gift of $50 and his genuine good wishes. After a small celebration at the hotel, Zachary helped Deanna into the wagon he had brought to town, loaded with her few possessions. As they drove west out of Breckenridge toward the ranch, Deanna felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was what she had been searching for, even if she had not known it. Not just a place to work or a roof over her head, but a home, a partner, a future. The ranch house was a sturdy log structure with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. It was not large, just a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and a small loft accessible by a ladder. But it was clean and well built, and Zachary had spent the past 3 weeks making it ready for a bride. There were curtains on the windows, new blankets on the bed, and a vase on the table that he had clearly intended to fill with flowers before remembering it was December and nothing was blooming. "It is not much," Zachary said, suddenly nervous, "but it is solid and I own it free and clear. We can add on as we need to, maybe another bedroom or two in a few years." Deanna turned to him and placed her hand on his chest. "It is perfect. It is ours, and that makes it perfect." That first winter as husband and wife taught them both about partnership. The work of running the ranch was constant and demanding. Zachary tended to the cattle and horses, repaired fences and equipment, cut wood for the fireplace. Deanna cooked and cleaned, but she also learned to help with the animals, feeding chickens and gathering eggs, milking the cow, even helping to birth a calf when Zachary needed an extra pair of hands one freezing January night. "You are amazing," he told her afterward, both of them exhausted and covered in blood and birth fluids, the new calf wobbling on unsteady legs beside its mother. "Most women would have fainted." "I am not most women," Deanna said matter-of-factly. "And we are partners, Zachary. That means I do whatever needs doing." They grew closer through the shared work, learning each other's rhythms and habits. Deanna discovered that Zachary liked his coffee black and strong, that he hummed tunelessly when he was content, that he had a deep fear of letting her down. Zachary learned that Deanna sang while she cooked, that she read books whenever she could get her hands on them, that beneath her practical exterior was a woman capable of deep emotion and fierce loyalty. At night, in the warmth of their bed, they explored the physical dimensions of their relationship with tenderness and growing confidence. Deanna had come to the marriage with some fear, having heard too many stories of husbands who treated wives as property. But Zachary was gentle and patient, and he cared about her pleasure as much as his own. Their lovemaking became another language between them, a way of expressing feelings that sometimes seemed too large for words. By spring, Deanna suspected she was pregnant. The signs were there. Her missed monthly courses, the way certain smells made her nauseous, the tenderness in her breasts. When she was sure, she waited for the right moment to tell Zachary. It came on an evening in April after a long day of work. They were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. "Zachary," she said, taking his hand, "I have something to tell you." He turned to her, immediately attentive. "What is it? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually. I am pregnant. We are going to have a baby." For a moment, Zachary just stared at her. Then his face broke into the widest smile she had ever seen, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared the horses in the barn. He picked her up and spun her around, then immediately set her down carefully, worried he might have hurt her. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Deanna, this is the best news I could have imagined. Are you happy? Are you scared? Do you feel all right? Do you need anything?" Deanna laughed at his barrage of questions. "I am happy and a little scared and feeling perfectly fine, and I do not need anything except for you to stop worrying quite so much." But Zachary could not help worrying. Over the following months, he fussed over Deanna constantly, trying to keep her from working too hard, bringing her special treats from town, reading everything he could find about pregnancy and childbirth. Diana found his concern endearing even when it became slightly overbearing. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him when he tried to prevent her from lifting a basket of laundry. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "But you are my woman, carrying my child," Zachary said stubbornly. "And I will do everything in my power to make sure both of you are safe and healthy." Their child, a son, was born on a cold November morning in 1884, a year and a day after their wedding. The birth was long and difficult, and Zachary spent most of it pacing anxiously in the main room while the doctor from Breckenridge and a midwife from a neighboring ranch attended to Diana. When he finally heard the baby's cry and was allowed into the bedroom, he found Diana exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced, squalling bundle. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I was thinking we could name him Zane, after your father's middle name." Zachary looked down at the impossibly tiny person in Diana's arms, his son, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Zane Zimmerman. That is perfect." Parenthood transformed them again, adding new dimensions to their partnership. Zachary discovered reserves of tenderness he had not known he possessed, marveling at tiny fingers and toes, pacing the floor at night when Zane could not sleep, making silly faces just to see his son smile. Diana found strength she had not realized she had, powering through exhaustion and worry to care for this new life they had created together. The seasons passed, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and a growing family. Zane learned to walk, to talk, to help with small chores around the ranch. When he was 3, Diana gave birth to a daughter they named Violet, who had her mother's determined chin and her father's stormy eyes. 2 years after that came another son, Samuel, quieter than his siblings but no less loved. Through it all, the bond between Zachary and Diana only deepened. They had their disagreements, of course. There were times when the pressures of work and money and raising children made them short-tempered with each other. But they had learned to talk through their problems, to remember that they were on the same team, and to never go to bed angry. One summer evening, when Zane was 7 and Violet was 4 and Samuel was 2, they sat together on the porch after getting the children to bed. It was the same spot where Diana had told Zachary about her first pregnancy, where they had shared countless conversations over the years. "Do you ever regret it?" Zachary asked suddenly. "Coming to Breckenridge, marrying me this life?" Diana looked at him in surprise. "Where is this coming from?" "I was just thinking today, watching you work so hard, about how different your life would be if you had never stepped off that stagecoach. You could have ended up somewhere easier, with more opportunities, maybe in a city somewhere." Diana took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Zachary Zimmerman, in all the years we have been married, have I ever given you reason to think I regret our life? No, but then stop supposing. Yes, this life is hard. Yes, there are days when I am so tired I can barely move, but it is our life and I would not trade it for anything. You gave me something I had been searching for without even knowing it. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me yourself. How could I ever regret that?" Zachary pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I love you, Diana. More than I thought it was possible to love another person. I love you too, always." As the years continued to pass, the ranch prospered. Zachary's hard work and Diana's careful management of their finances allowed them to expand their herd, to build a larger barn, to add those extra bedrooms to the house. They became well respected in the community, known as honest, hardworking people who kept their word and helped their neighbors when needed. Zane grew into a sturdy boy who loved working with the horses, and Zachary began teaching him the skills he would need to run the ranch one day. Violet was bright and curious, always asking questions, and Deanna taught her to read and write and cook. Samuel was gentle and thoughtful, with a special talent for calming spooked animals. When Zane was 12, he asked his parents how they had met. They were sitting around the dinner table, and the question seemed to come out of nowhere. "I mean, I know you met in Breckenridge," Zane clarified. "But how did you know you wanted to get married?" Zachary and Deanna exchanged a smile, a whole conversation passing between them in that glance. "Your mother came to Breckenridge looking for work," Zachary began. "She had traveled a long way, and she did not know anyone in town. I saw her step off that stagecoach, and there was something about her that caught my attention. She looked determined, like nothing was going to stop her from making a life for herself. I got a job cooking at the hotel," Deanna continued, "and your father started coming in for dinner on Saturdays. We would talk a little bit each time, and I found myself looking forward to those conversations more than anything else in my week." "So it was love at first sight?" Violet asked romantically. "More like recognition at first sight," Deanna said thoughtfully. "I think we both recognized something in each other, a loneliness that matched, a hope for something better. The love came from getting to know each other, from realizing we wanted the same things from life. I knew I wanted to marry your mother because I could not imagine my life without her," Zachary said simply. "And I still feel that way every single day." "That is so sweet," Violet sighed, while Zane made a face at such sentimental talk, though Deanna could see he was pleased by the story nonetheless. There were challenges over the years, as there always are in any life. A particularly harsh winter when they lost several head of cattle and had to scrimp and save to make it through. A summer when drought threatened the hay crop and they had to buy feed at inflated prices. The year Samuel broke his arm falling from a horse, and they spent an agonizing day getting him to Breckenridge and back. Each crisis they faced together, supporting each other through the difficult times. There were also moments of pure joy. The first time Zane successfully broke a horse on his own, and the pride that shone in his face. Violet's 10th birthday, when Deanna managed to surprise her with a store-bought dress from Denver. The Christmas when Samuel received a puppy that became his constant companion. The summer evenings when they would all sit on the porch together, watching the stars come out, feeling complete. One particularly memorable day came when Zane was 18, now a young man rather than a boy. He came to his parents with news that he had been courting a girl from a neighboring ranch, Emily Patterson, and he wanted to marry her. "You are sure about this?" Zachary asked, though he could see the answer in his son's eyes. It was the same look he had probably worn when he proposed to Deanna all those years ago. "I am sure, Pa, she is the one. I know it." Zachary looked at Deanna, and she gave him a slight nod. They both saw the echo of themselves in their son's young love. "Then you have our blessing," Zachary said, shaking his son's hand. "But you take care of her, you hear me? A good woman is a treasure beyond measure." "I know, Pa, you taught me that." Zane and Emily married the following spring in a ceremony that brought together both families and much of the community. Watching his son pledge his life to the woman he loved, Zachary found himself thinking back to his own wedding day, to the nervous excitement and boundless hope. He reached for Diana's hand, and she squeezed his fingers, understanding without words what he was feeling. After the wedding, Zane and Emily built a small cabin on the far end of the Zimmerman ranch. The plan was for Zane to gradually take over more of the daily operations, allowing Zachary to slow down a bit as he got older. It was a good arrangement, keeping the family together while allowing the young couple their independence. Time continued its relentless march forward. Violet grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's sharp mind and her father's love of the land. She surprised everyone by announcing at 19 that she wanted to become a teacher, and with her parents' support, she went to Denver for training. Samuel, at 17, was becoming an accomplished horseman, with plans to breed and train horses alongside the cattle operation. Zachary was 53 now, his dark hair silvered at the temples, lines carved deep around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still strong, still capable, still in love with his wife and his life. Deanna was 48, her face showing the marks of time and hard work, but to Zachary she was as beautiful as the day she stepped off that stagecoach, perhaps more so because of all they had shared. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching yet another sunset, Deanna said, "We have done well, haven't we?" "We have," Zachary agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you remember what you said to me once before we were married? About how your father told you a ranch needs a family to make it complete?" "I remember. He was right. This place, it needed us. We needed it. We made it complete, and it made us complete." Zachary wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. "You made me complete, Deanna. Everything good in my life flows from the day you arrived in Breckenridge looking for work. And I found so much more than work," Deanna said softly. "I found my home. I found my purpose. I found you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. From the cabin across the way came the sound of laughter, Zane and Emily enjoying their own evening together. The lights were on in the house behind them, where Samuel was probably reading before bed. "You think we will have grandchildren soon?" Deanna asked, a hint of hope in her voice. "I would not be surprised. I see the way Emily has been glowing lately. And Zane has been building a cradle in the barn, though he thinks I have not noticed." "A cradle?" Deanna sat up straight, eyes sparkling. "Really? Why did you not tell me? I figured he would share the news when he is ready. But yes, I suspect we will be grandparents before too long." Deanna settled back against her husband with a contented sigh. "Grandparents? How did we get old enough to be grandparents? We are not old," Zachary protested. "We are experienced." Deanna laughed, the sound as warm and genuine as it had been 25 years earlier. "That is one way to put it." Indeed, 2 months later, Zane and Emily announced they were expecting their first child. The baby, a girl they named Rose, arrived in the spring of 1909, making Zachary and Deanna grandparents at last. Holding that tiny infant in her arms, Deanna felt the circle of life complete itself in the most satisfying way. "She is perfect," Deanna whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked at her granddaughter. "Just like her grandmother," Zachary said, his own eyes suspiciously bright. Little Rose was followed by a brother named James 2 years later, and then another sister named Clara. Violet eventually returned from Denver with a husband of her own, a newspaperman named Thomas Mitchell, ironically sharing Deanna's maiden name though no relation. They settled in Breckenridge, where Thomas bought the local paper, and Violet taught at the school. She gave her parents 2 grandchildren, twin boys named Henry and George. Samuel married at 25 to a quiet, capable woman named Martha who shared his love of horses. They built their own small house on the ranch and added 3 more grandchildren to the growing family. Daughters named Alice and Mee, and finally, a son named Zachary Jr. after his grandfather. The ranch that had once felt too empty for one lonely man now bustled with life. Multiple generations worked together, ate together, celebrated together. Zachary and Deanna, now in their 60s, had stepped back from the hardest physical labor but remained the heart of the family, the source of wisdom and experience that everyone turned to. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a celebration. The main house could not hold everyone anymore, so they set up tables in the yard. Deanna looked around at the faces of her children, their spouses, her grandchildren, all the love and life that had sprung from her decision to step off a stagecoach in Breckenridge 3 decades earlier. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, seeing the emotional expression on her face. "I am thinking about how one decision can change everything. If I had stayed on that stage, if I had gone to a different town, if I had not gotten that job at the hotel, none of this would exist. These children, these grandchildren, this family, they all exist because I chose to stop here. And I chose to speak to you," Zachary added. "Two lonely people who found each other and built all of this." He gestured at the scene before them, the long tables laden with food, the children running and playing, the adults talking and laughing. "I would not change a single thing," Deanna said firmly. "Not one moment, not even the hard times. It all led us here." Their grandson James, now a precocious 8-year-old, approached them with a serious expression. "Grandpa, Grandma, I have a question." "What is it, sweetheart?" Deanna asked. "How did you know Grandpa was the right person to marry? How does anyone know?" Deanna smiled at the innocent question. "That is a very good question, James. I think you know because being with that person feels like coming home. They make you want to be your best self, and you want the same for them. You trust them completely, and they trust you. And when you imagine your future, you cannot imagine it without them in it." "That is how I felt about your grandmother," Zachary added, "and I still feel that way every day." James nodded thoughtfully, then ran off to rejoin his cousins, apparently satisfied with the answer. As the celebration continued into the evening with music and dancing under the stars, Zachary pulled Deanna aside for a private moment. They walked a little way from the crowd, to the spot where he had proposed to her all those years ago by Gold Creek. "I have been thinking," Zachary said, "about everything we have built together, everything we have accomplished, and I want to make sure you know how grateful I am. You took a chance on a lonely cowboy who had nothing to offer but hard work and a rough life. You could have said no. You could have chosen differently at any point. But you stayed, and you built this life with me, and I will spend the rest of my days being thankful for that." Deanna felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 30 years, this man could still make her feel cherished and loved. "Zachary, you have it backwards. I am the one who should be grateful. I came here with nothing, desperate for any kind of work, any kind of stability. You gave me everything. You gave me a home and a family and a love I had not even known to dream of. You saw me, really saw me, when I was just a dusty woman stepping off a stagecoach. You looked at me and saw someone worth knowing, worth loving, worth building a life with." "I saw my future," Zachary said simply. "And I was right." They kissed there by the creek, the same creek that had witnessed their engagement, their love as strong and true as it had been 3 decades earlier, perhaps stronger for all the years and experiences they had weathered together. The party continued late into the night, and when the last guests had finally departed and the grandchildren had been carried off to bed by their parents, Zachary and Deanna sat on their porch one more time, as they had done thousands of times before. 30 years, Deanna mused. Where did the time go? Into every moment we have shared, Zachary said. Into raising our children and building this ranch and creating this family. The time did not disappear. It transformed into all of this. Deanna leaned her head on his shoulder. You always know exactly what to say. Not always, but I have had a lot of practice with you. They sat in companionable silence, holding hands, watching the moon rise over the mountains. The night air was cool and sweet with the scent of pine and sagebrush. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. Everything was peaceful, everything was right. You know what I love most about our life, Deanna asked after a while. "What?" "That we built it together. Every fence post, every meal, every decision, we made it together. We were truly partners in every sense of the word. That is what you promised me when you proposed, that we would be partners, and you have kept that promise every single day." "It was an easy promise to keep," Zachary said. "I have always needed you as much as you needed me, probably more if I am being honest. We needed each other. That is the point. Neither of us could have built this life alone." They sat for a while longer, reluctant to go inside and end this perfect day. Finally, Deanna yawned and Zachary chuckled. "Come on, my love. Let us get you to bed. We have another day ahead of us tomorrow." "Another day together," Deanna said, letting him help her to her feet. "That is all I could ever want." Years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their family story. Zachary and Deanna grew older, their hair fully white now, their movements slower but their minds still sharp and their love undimmed. They watched their grandchildren grow up, some staying on the ranch, others venturing out to make their own way in the world. They welcomed great-grandchildren, marveling at the idea that their union had created such an extensive family tree. The ranch remained prosperous under Zane's management, though he always deferred to his father's wisdom on important decisions. Samuel's horse breeding operation had become renowned throughout Colorado, with buyers coming from as far away as Denver and Colorado Springs. Violet had become one of the most respected teachers in Breckenridge, known for her dedication to her students. When Zachary was 72 and Deanna was 67, they decided to take a trip back to Breckenridge together, just the two of them. It had been years since they had visited town without some specific purpose, some errand to run or person to see. This time, they simply wanted to walk the streets where their love story had begun. Breckenridge had changed considerably in the nearly 4 decades since Deanna had first arrived. The gold mining was mostly played out, replaced by ranching and some early tourism as people from the cities discovered the beauty of the mountains. But the basic bones of the town remained the same, and the Silver Bell Hotel still stood on Main Street, though under different ownership now. They walked slowly, arm in arm, pointing out places that held memories for them. The church where they had married, the general store where Zachary had been standing when he first saw Deanna, the bank where they had gotten their first loan to expand the ranch. "It seems smaller than I remember," Deanna observed. "We have gotten bigger," Zachary said. "Not in size, but in experience. The world seems smaller when you have lived more of life." They ended their walk by Gold Creek, finding a spot to sit on the bank much like they had done so many times as young lovers. "You remember the first time we walked here?" Deanna asked. "I remember every time we walked here," Zachary said. "But yes, I especially remember the first time. I was so nervous about courting you properly. I wanted to do everything right." "You did do everything right. You were respectful and kind and honest. You let me know your intentions without pressuring me. You made me feel valued. You were valuable. You are valuable. The most valuable thing in my life." Deanna kissed his cheek. "We should come back here more often. It is good to remember where we started." "As long as we always end up back at the ranch," Zachary said. "That is our true home." "Agreed." They returned to the ranch that evening to find that Emily had organized a surprise welcome home dinner for them, with most of the family gathered to share a meal. The long table, worn smooth by years of use, was crowded with faces old and young, all of them connected by the love between the two people at the head of the table. As Deanna looked around at her family, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This was her legacy, not just the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but the love and strength and values she and Zachary had instilled in them. They had created not just a family, but a foundation that would continue long after they were gone. When Zachary was 78, he fell ill with pneumonia. For a terrifying few weeks, Diana feared she might lose him. She sat by his bedside day and night, refusing to leave, holding his hand and talking to him even when he was too weak to respond. The family gathered, understanding that this might be the end, but none of them were ready to let go of the patriarch who had been such a steady presence in all their lives. But Zachary was stubborn, and he fought his way back from the edge. Diana joked that he was too ornery to die, but privately she thanked God for every additional day they were granted together. "You scared me," she told him when he was finally well enough to sit up and take solid food. "Scared myself," Zachary admitted, his voice still weak. "But I was not ready to leave you yet. We still have more time together." "How much time?" Diana asked, trying to keep her voice light but unable to hide the tremor of fear. "As much as the good Lord grants us, and I intend to make every moment count." He recovered slowly but steadily, and by summer he was back to his old self, if perhaps a bit more tired than before. They spent more time sitting together, less time working, understanding that their remaining time was precious and not to be wasted on unnecessary labor. Their children and grandchildren had the ranch well in hand. Now was the time to simply enjoy the fruits of their years of hard work. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in December of 1934, an event that brought family members from across Colorado. The ranch house, expanded multiple times over the years, still could not hold everyone, so they held the celebration in the large barn, decorated for the occasion with evergreen boughs and ribbons. Diana wore a new dress that Violet had helped her pick out in Denver, a soft blue color that Zachary said matched her eyes. Zachary wore a suit that his grandchildren had pooled their money to buy for him. They stood together in front of their assembled family, and Zane made a speech about the example his parents had set, about the love and partnership that had built not just a successful ranch but a strong family. 50 years ago, Zane said, his voice thick with emotion, my father took a chance on love. My mother took a chance on a lonely cowboy with more dreams than money. Together they built all of this. He gestured around the room. This family, this ranch, this legacy. They showed us what real love looks like. It is not just romance, though they certainly had that. It is partnership. It is working together through hard times. It is choosing each other every day, even when that choice is difficult. They have given us an example to live up to, and I hope we can pass that same example on to our own children. There was not a dry eye in the barn by the time he finished. Zachary stood, helping Diana to her feet and addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here," he said. 50 years ago, I was a lonely man who thought he might spend his entire life alone. Then Diana stepped off a stagecoach in Breckenridge, looking for work, and my whole world changed. She was not looking for a husband. I was not looking for a wife, at least not consciously. But somehow we found each other anyway. She has been my partner, my best friend, my love, and the mother of my children. She has made every day of the past 50 years worth living, and if I could go back and do it all again, the only thing I would change is that I would start sooner. Diana rose and stood beside him. I came west with nothing but a carpet bag and $12 to my name. I was looking for work, for survival, for some kind of stability. What I found was infinitely better. I found a home. I found a purpose. I found a man who valued me not for what I could do for him, but for who I was. Zachary gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams, and I have tried every day to give him the same. 50 years is a long time, but it has not been long enough. I love you, Zachary Zimmerman, and I will love you for whatever time we have left and beyond. They kissed, to the cheers and applause of their family, and the celebration continued long into the night with food and music and dancing. Zachary and Deanna danced together, moving slowly to account for their age but with a grace born of decades of moving in sync with each other. 50 years, Zachary murmured into Deanna's ear. Who would have thought? Anyone who saw us together, Deanna replied. We were meant for this, you and I. Meant for each other, meant for this life. No regrets. He asked the question he had asked many times over the years, always seeking reassurance that she was happy. Not a single one. You, Zachary Zimmerman, are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you, Deanna Zimmerman, are the best thing that ever happened to me. They continued to dance, surrounded by the family their love had created, grateful for every moment they had shared and every moment yet to come. Zachary lived to be 83 years old, an impressive age for a man who had worked hard his entire life. He died peacefully in his sleep, with Deanna lying beside him as she had for nearly 55 years of marriage. When she woke that winter morning and realized he was gone, she felt as if part of her own soul had departed with him. But even in her grief, she recognized that they had been blessed. Not everyone got to spend over half a century with their true love. Not everyone got to build such a life, such a family, such a legacy. And Zachary had not suffered, had not lingered in pain. He had simply slipped away in the night at peace. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Colorado to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his honesty, his hard work, and his devotion to his family. Deanna sat surrounded by her children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, drawing strength from the legacy she and Zachary had built together. In the months that followed, Deanna found her way through grief with the support of her family. She remained on the ranch, in the house she and Zachary had shared for so many years. She was not ready to leave, and her family understood. This was her home, filled with memories of her husband, and she needed those memories now. She spent her days visiting with her various family members, playing with great-grandchildren, and sitting on the porch where she and Zachary had spent so many evenings together. She told stories about their life together to anyone who would listen, wanting to make sure that future generations understood the foundation their family was built on. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching the sunset alone, little Rose, now a grown woman with children of her own, came to sit beside her. "Grandma, can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." "How do you bear it, missing Grandpa so much?" Diana was quiet for a moment, considering. "I bear it by remembering how blessed I was to have him. Many people go through their entire lives without finding a love like ours. We had 55 years together. That is a gift beyond price. Do I wish we had more time? Of course, but I do not waste the time I have left grieving for what is gone. Instead, I celebrate what we had. I look at this family, at all of you, and I see him everywhere. He lives on in each of you. Do you think you will see him again? I do. I do not know what comes after this life, but I have to believe that love like ours does not just end. Somehow, somewhere, we will be together again." Rose hugged her grandmother tightly. "I hope I can find a love like you and Grandpa had. You will, dear, and when you do, cherish it. Work at it every day. That is the secret, you know. We did not have a perfect marriage because we were perfect people. We had a strong marriage because we chose each other, every single day, even when it was hard." Diana lived for 5 more years after Zachary's death, remaining sharp and engaged with her family until the very end. She died at the age of 80, surrounded by loved ones, her last words being a whispered, "I am coming, Zachary." They buried her beside her husband on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together under the open Colorado sky. The entire family gathered once more, now spanning 4 generations, all of them existing because a woman had stepped off a stagecoach looking for work, and a lonely cowboy had found the partner he had been searching for. Zane stood at his mother's grave after the service, his own grandchildren playing nearby, and thought about the legacy his parents had left. The ranch would continue. The family would continue. But more importantly, the example of love and partnership and dedication his parents had embodied would continue, passed down through the generations. In the years that followed, as Breckenridge evolved from a mining town to a ski resort town, as Colorado changed and the West changed and the country changed, the Zimmerman Ranch remained. Different generations took over its management, but the core values remained the same: hard work, honesty, family, love, and sometimes on quiet evenings, family members sitting on the old porch would swear they could hear the echo of laughter, of conversation, of two people who had loved each other so completely that their presence seemed to linger in the very walls of the place they had built together. The story of Zachary and Deanna became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. How she had arrived seeking work, how he had been lonely, how they had found in each other exactly what they needed, how they had built not just a ranch but a life, not just a family but a legacy. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, a testament to the power of two people choosing to face life together. They had not had an easy life, but they had had a good life, a full life, a life worth living, and in the end that was all that mattered.